Okay, this is another video response to Once Forgiven, Now Free. Yes, despite the fact you still haven't answered my questions in regards to information theory, I'm going to respond to this video anyway. But please, I think you owe me a response. You can't just keep going around talking like a smarty, and when people correct you and when they respond to you, you ignore. If you want to have a discussion and you want to ask a question and have an answer, then at least acknowledge that somebody has asked you a question or given you an answer. Or admit that when somebody asks you a question, you don't know the answer. That's how dialogue works. If you want a dialogue, I think that would be the way to go about it. If you have an alternative suggestion, I'm listening. All right? Okay, before I actually get into the arguments that you've made in this so-called video response to Qualia Soup about irreducible complexity, I have to forewarn you. Do you really want to argue for irreducible complexity? Because if you do, you cannot at the same time argue that vestigial organs are not vestigial. Okay? Just warning you. You can't have both. Evolution scientists hold that vestigial organs are less functional than they were, thus making them vestigial, but not useless. We also hold that nothing in nature or life is irreducibly complex, and everything can gradually evolve step by step. We cannot have both, and nor can you. So if you want to argue that something is irreducibly complex, you have to acknowledge that there are vestigial organs. If you don't understand what I'm talking about, then I have to say you are not qualified to comment on biology. That's just the nicest way to say it, okay? Now, another stop before we actually get into your argument. How about you actually tell us what is good enough to refute irreducible complexity? Why are we wasting our time giving you our best answers with attempts to give you an explanation of what we understand just so you can say, sorry, that's not good enough? How about you actually tell us what would be good enough? What would refute irreducible complexity? What would it take for you to say, okay, thank you, now I accept that Michael Behe is wrong and irreducible complexity is a logically flawed theory or logically inconsistent claim or scientifically unsupported theory or hypothesis or scientifically discredited? What would it take for you to say that? If there's anything at all, please tell us. The reason I ask this is that you, like most creationists or ID-its, have a good tendency to move the goalpost, and this comes straight from Behe himself. This happened at the Dover trial. What happened at the Dover trial was that he kept saying that I study things that are irreducibly complex, and these things cannot gradually form naturally or evolve gradually. And as soon as somebody gives him an answer, he'll say, sorry, that's not good enough. And they'll give him another answer, and he'll say, well, I don't want to say that this answer isn't good enough, but it's just not good enough. But he'll never tell you what is good enough. So he's free to move the goalpost around and always jump and deny. So this is not going to happen, okay? If you already decided nothing's ever going to be good enough, say it. That's okay. Don't pretend like you're interested in an answer when you're not. So tell us what would be good enough to refute irreducible complexity, then we'll work from there. If we can give you an answer, we'll do our best. But if we can't, we won't waste our time or yours. We'll just say, sorry, you're asking us for something we don't know or it is impossible, so you win. All right? Okay, on with Behe's argument or definition in the book Darwin's Black Box. He defines that an irreducibly complex system is a single system composed of several parts. Okay, something should be screaming out at you right now. Can you define what is a part? What constitutes a part? What's the definition of a part? You never define this, just like you don't define what is a kind, just like you don't define what is new information. So if you don't define a goalpost, you're always going to say, sorry, you didn't give me an answer because that's not what I was looking for. Well, maybe you don't even know what you're looking for. Does a mousetrap really have 5 parts? Or are each of these alleged 5 parts really composed of other parts? Because what you're going to do is you're going to ask me, how did this mousetrap with 5 important parts come to be? And I'll tell you, well, first you start with this part and that part, and you put 5 parts together, then you're going to say, well, how did those individual 5 parts come to be? And then I tell you, okay, this is how you get a base, this is how you get a spring, this is how you get a hammer. Then you're going to say, yeah, but where did the ingredients and material of making a hammer and making a base come from? Then I'll tell you that, and then you'll say, yeah, but where did the matter come from to make that material? Ad infinitum. Ultimately, you're going to say, because I can't tell you how the universe came from nothing, therefore a mousetrap was designed. Doesn't work that way. Stick to one question at a time. If you're just going to ask me how a mousetrap was built, fine. If you're just going to ask me how the universe came from nothing, fine. Don't ask one question after another and then say I didn't answer your question. Another part of Behe's argument is that if you remove a component from a irreducibly complex organism, it would be by definition non-functional, or by definition useless. Okay, says who? He basically made his own definition of what is irreducibly complex and what is useless. So does he really stick with this definition given everything that comes to him? If so, then you would have to admit, using this definition, that vestigial organs are vestigial, or less than optimal, because it has lost or gained a function that it was in the previous generations. Something that is functional or meaningful are context dependent and quite subjective. What's not functional in one context can be functional in another context. In the Dover trial, Ken Miller argued that a mousetrap, even if a mousetrap cannot serve perfectly as a mousetrap, it serves fine as a tie tack. Not very fashionable, but if your goal is just to make a tie stick to your shirt, then a mousetrap works quite fine as a tie tack. And therefore, it is not completely useless. If you're just going to say, well, a mousetrap has to be a complete mousetrap in order to be a mousetrap, well, then that's true of everything. Basically, what's designed has to be designed or it's not designed, and what's not designed can't be designed or it's designed. You're not really saying anything. It's just tautology going in circles, endlessly. You ask us how a stereo is formed or built, and you say that we can't start from an amplifier. Okay, so why don't you just tell us what it is you're asking? As soon as I tell you, okay, well, we won't start with an amplifier. We'll start with a metal box, or we'll start with a bunch of copper wires. You're going to ask me, where did copper wires come from? Where did copper come from? Where did the element copper come from? So that's never going to satisfy you. Just tell us what is really what you're asking for. You want the schematics, or you want the origin of elements, or you want the origin of the universe. Because until you tell us what you're asking for, it's impossible for us to give you a satisfying answer. You asked us regarding the mousetrap, why don't we show you how to build a mousetrap? Or why can't we explain how a mousetrap was built? Well, first of all, we didn't give the mousetrap argument. Behe did. So why should we explain an argument that we didn't make? Funny, isn't it? Somebody makes his own straw man argument and asks somebody else to explain an argument he made that nobody else seems to subscribe to. Clever. Secondly, if your goal is to build a mousetrap, then right off the bat, you have intention. You have